There's not a story arc on this album to give a track like this any discernible purpose.
Man, that boy spitting. That boy is spitting. So the new Freddie Gibbs album, You Only Die Once, good album. It's a sequel to his 2017 album, You Only Live Twice. Can we be real about this Ab-Soul album, the new one, titled Soul Burger? Kind of mid. And look, I know we all want Ab-Soul to win. I know Ab-Soul, part of his music career, there's this underlying like depression and a lot of things that have happened to him. Like he tried to jump off the freeway. He lost Olori Joe in the early 2010s. So I want to tread lightly on this topic. Like I don't want to critique him personally. I just want to talk about the music and what I'm seeing, right? I have an issue with Ab-Soul's music after Control System. This Long-Term Mentality project, this is a great project. I encourage everyone to go listen to it. Control System is Ab-Soul's magnum opus. And these days is, I think, where a lot of people stopped listening because this was not a cohesive album. There was like a lot of random stuff going on the These Days project. If I'm not mistaken, this is the album with the song called Twacked. Is this the album with Twacked? Yeah.
Twack, get high, she get low. Motherfucker, I'm Twack.
Featuring Young Jinx and Short Dog. This is just such a random song sound-wise. It's unlike anything Ab-Soul was releasing at the time. And it's just kind of placed randomly in the album, right? It's not to say These Days didn't have good songs, but when you compare like cohesiveness and you compare it to what preceded it, which was Control System, a lot of people felt let down by this album, despite the Kendrick Lamar interlude, despite Stigmata, World Runners featuring Lupe. I think this is the first time people kind of started looking at Ab-Soul's music a little differently. Then you had Do What Thou Wilt in 2016, which I thought this was a good album. I remember reviewing this album. I gave it favorable reviews, right? Then you got Herbert, which I don't particularly remember this album, and I'm pretty sure I reacted to this album on my channel. But I don't particularly remember this, which is not a good sign. Maybe out there, you thought this was one of Ab-Soul's best works. I really can't even speak on this super detailed because I don't even remember what this sounds like, despite it being less than 2 years ago, and despite me I reacted to the whole album live with you guys. I have an issue with this because this album it has the same lack of cohesion that Ab-Soul's other albums other than Long-Term Mentality and Control System have. I appreciate the intro, 9 Mile. It has like Eminem 8 Mile thing he does on it, kind of skit he does on it. It starts soul sample, if I remember correctly, and then Ab-Soul just giving us bars. Cool. But as you listen through the album, and I like the features even. You got Jason Martin, aka Problem. You got Vince Staples. It just suffers from the same focus, I would say. Instead of lack of cohesion, I'll say focus. But I'm describing the same issue that I have with it. It doesn't have that focus that Control System has. And I know this is not really fair to take an artist's best work and compare everything they do after that to that album. But when there are certain things missing, that would be like if Kendrick Lamar dropped Good Kid, Mad City, but then he never had another thematic album where there's a cohesive theme and there's like a detailed storytelling focus. He just did Good Kid, Mad City, and everything else was never like that again. He never was able to capture the thematics, the cinematics that Good Kid, Mad City had. We would always look back at Good Kid, Mad City like, dang, like, why don't you do this again? And Soul Burger lacks that. And I kind of started this review, you know, trying to empathize with Ab-Soul. Like, I know there's like this underlying depressive layer, probably in his personal life. You can hear it in the music, but when you just understand a few things that we know publicly that have happened to Ab-Soul, the Olori Joe RIP, Ab-Soul a couple years ago trying to take his own life, Ab-Soul having this Steven Johnson syndrome, which, you know, I can't even fathom or describe the amount of physical and emotional pain that Ab-Soul must be going through. And has been going through for an extended period. So I do want to be sensitive to that. I don't really like having to take all this into account when I'm reviewing an album, because to me it's just about the music, but I do want to be sensitive to it. But and here's my conflict. I think being sensitive to it, it kind of affects how harsh I'm going to be on the album, which is not fair to the viewer. It's not fair to you guys, because it's like, you're here for just a straight take, like a no bullshit. But then here I am having to dance around this to try to be politically correct. So it's a conflict that I have, but I just figured that it's right. It's the right thing to do to lead with that. So Soul Burger, it has like moments, but there are no like high moments on this album. There's no song on here where it's like, yo, this is a great, excellent song. And it's not like Ab-Soul's not capable of doing this. Like Pineal Gland, Terrorist Threats, these are all songs that are like standouts, 4 or 5 star songs, like amazing hip hop songs, cult classics. That doesn't exist here. Despite great features, you know, with Jid, you got Lou, you got Vince Staples' Problem, like we said earlier. I just don't feel the focus here on this Ab-Soul album. Some of the songs feel older. It just feels, it follows Ab-Soul's other albums, not Control System, not Long-Term Mentality, but it follows these albums. I wouldn't even put Do What Thou Wilt. It follows These Days and Herbert, where it's like a little forgettable. The songs aren't bad. It's just everything's kind of like subpar. He's not hitting his stride. Like if Ab-Soul is a hooper and he's used to scoring 25 a game, and on Control System, he scored 25 a game. Long term, he's scoring 20 a game. These, he's scoring like 13, 14 a game. Still good. Like, you can't say Ab-Soul don't got bars. You can't say he's not one of the best out with the bars right now. But he's not rapping and song creating. I wouldn't say rapping specifically. Ab-Soul is not producing to like the potential that he's shown, in my opinion. And again, I know we all want Ab-Soul to win, so you probably won't see anyone really make any critiques about this album, but I just feel that way. It's a lot of just random songs, randomly placed, kind of random feeling songs. I wasn't a fan of the Ty Dolla $ign GoPro song. Even some songs I'm like Around Here. And again, it's the same issue what I have with some of Ab-Soul's other albums, not Control System, not Long-Term Mentality. As I'm looking through this album, I barely even remember what some of these sound like. I remember I didn't like GoPro and I didn't like Salty Sweats. And it was like this point in the album where I started really being like, all right, this is not gonna go in a direction that I'm gonna like. I barely even remember what some of this sounds like. I remember Jid's verse, I remember the features. When you think of this album, Soul Burger, right? There's not gonna be like a certain sound that you may think of. There's not gonna be a certain production direction that you think of. There's not even gonna be a standout song, like an excellent song. Like you can put this in the top 50 songs, rap songs of the year. There's really nothing that's gonna stand out despite having great features, despite having, oh, Schoolboy Q is a producer on this? Did Schoolboy Q rap on this? Okay, yeah, he's a writer on this. Anyways, despite having great production credits, you know, Tay Beast, who's been producing for TDE for so long, Ninth Wonder, Beat Butcher, Terrence Martin, despite having great placements, none of it really comes together the way it should. When you have a Jid feature, you have Schoolboy Q, you know, writing some of the stuff, or maybe he was a feature on this song, Payday. When you got, you know, Lupe, then you got Ninth Wonder on the beat, you got Terrence Martin on the beat, you got Tay, all these things, it should equal great songs, which I don't think it does. It just kind of equals mid songs. It's just not everything's mid. I really like California Dreamin', and I like all that. But as a whole, there is a distinct lack of focus, or I can say there's really no cohesion. Doesn't even really feel like any care, like detail, really, I would say, because I'm sure every artist cares about their work. But I don't know how much detail was placed into this. And even the bars, like Ab-Soul, lyrically good, but then some of the punchlines and bars, I'm like, these is cool, but again, it's not up to what we're used to hearing, the standard. It's not up to the standard of what Ab-Soul usually puts out. So anyways, Fantano just dropped his review, So I wonder what he has to say about this. So let's just take a quick look at this.
Ab-Soul continues to be on this record one of the most unique voices and lyricists on the label. In fact, I would call him one of the most difficult artists to categorize. While it is true that for years he has had a lot of crossover appeal with backpack legends such as Lupe Fiasco, who actually features on this album at one point, comparatively, I would say Ab-Soul content-wise tends to be a lot more metaphysical, sometimes hedonistic, sometimes socially subversive. He's really the kind of rapper most likely to lead you down a dark rabbit hole of conspiratorial Google searches, while also,
which is what we love. That's what we want from Ab-Soul.
So favoring production and song structures that sound like they're close to doing something a little accessible, but Solo usually finds a way to sidestep that with disorienting switch-ups, experimental effects, grading, and sometimes freaky sense of humor. And on top of it, his catalog tends to be such a mixed bag that from record to record, I really truly do not know what I'm going to get from a new Ab-Soul album. And for better or worse, he continues to defy any expectations that I could possibly have for his music. However, I did find this record to be one of his easiest to sum up as...
and that's kind of what I meant earlier. Lyrically, there's bars, but it's not like, again, we overseas back-to-back, never wore Chanel, genius, idiot, I'm in a fucking lab coat rhyming, I'm high as shit. When I die, donate my organs to like it's no like super complexity, ethereal type lyrics. Fantano says it a better way, a different way. It's more accessible. Me, I would say lyrically, it's not to Ab-Soul standard.
Repeatedly from track to track, we hear Ab-Soul accomplishing these impressive lyrical feats, but all of this effort is being poured into some of the most harebrained musical ideas that you will hear on any hip-hop record this year. I mean, take the opening track 9 Mile, for example, where
very stripped down sample.
We're getting a lot of raw bars and witty wordplay over just a cappella vocals from Soul to Soul's Back to Life. Then suddenly the song breaks into a bunch of self-effacing bars that are essentially a play on the Papa Doc verse that Eminem's character performs in the 8 Mile movie when he's in the midst of his battle with him in the film. And this comes complete with like a warped variation of the instrumental from that part in the movie. It's definitely odd.
Yeah, it's odd. And I think it's just Ab-Soul trying to, for me, it feels like Ab-Soul trying to have fun with music again, trying to find his interest with rapping again, and, you know, trying to get himself back into it. And one way that he's doing it is with humor. That's how a lot of the album felt to me, but especially that part.
One of the weirder conceptual clashes of ideas I've heard on a hip-hop record in a minute.
It's very odd.
What is even the point, really? Because all these disparate ideas, they don't come together into something that is greater than the sum of its parts. And while you could argue that the point of this song is essentially for Ab-Soul to reveal to us that he is more troubled and obsessed with money than he may seem, given just how heady his music is and how successful he is, the surrounding chaos of references and cartoony flows kind of take away from any personal impact that could have been conveyed here on this track.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Like a good portion of this album, and Fantano says it, again, I feel like we're saying similar things, but we're just saying them differently. He says, yo, these different parts, like it's odd, you have a soul to soul sample, and then you got the 8 Mile stuff, but then you got Ab-Soul being super lyrical. It's interesting, but it doesn't really, the parts never equate to a sum. Me, I said there's a lack of cohesion. And there's no focus. We're saying like very similar things. And I agree with that, man.
His music is and how successful he is. The surrounding chaos of references and cartoony flows kind of take away from any personal impact.
And that's why I say it sounds like for a good chunk of this album, especially that intro that he's talking about, it just seems like Ab-Soul is trying to have fun again. Whereas on Control System and on Long-Term Mentality, there's a hunger on long-term mentality, and then there's a focus. There's a hungry Ab-Soul on long-term mentality, but then there's a focused Ab-Soul on Control System. And that's why those projects are as good as they are. You can feel it through the record. On Soul Burger, it just feels like he's trying to have fun again. It sounds like maybe he was disinterested in rap, or you have Ab-Soul, like I mentioned in my review. He has a lot of these things going on in his life. Maybe that took his interest or the fun away from rap for him, and it just feels like he's trying to have fun again. To me.
that could have been conveyed here on this track. Not to mention the pacing and transitions on the song failed to really build up any actual momentum
Yeah.
across the whole thing. And unfortunately, there are similar problems undoing the rest of the record. While the frenzied flows and eerie keys and trap beats on Payday feel like a bit of a throwback to Absol's Control System days, the lyrical substance isn't really
Yeah.
there, and on top of it, the sort of odd EDM-esque beat switch up around the midpoint of the song kind of detours the track into no man's land, and it never quite recovers.
I respect that critique, but I don't really listen to Absol for the production. Like, the production didn't bother me, right? I'll say that. It's the lack of lyrical focus from Absol, because that's what I've come to expect from Absol. That is what bothers me most.
The Good Burger reference that kind of ties into the title of the song right after kind of comes across as deeply unserious, and it leaves the
Yeah.
track just feeling like a very out of place, obnoxious interlude. Past this point, though, I will say the first leg of this record goes down relatively smooth, even though it does leave a bit to be desired. Be that on the song All That, which is kind of like a warped Bay Area bop, a bit darker than you might usually get out of something in this lane. A lot of gangsta-themed content in the lyrics, which you don't usually get in a lot of Absol's music, too.
Yeah.
And while I do like this...
Yeah, I found that odd, too. Like, the gangster, I found that very odd.
Direction and the song structure of this track is most definitely sharp. The verses are so understated that they're kind of in one ear and out the other. The chorus is just about the only part of the track that truly goes. Following this, California Dream is similarly subdued, but it does kick off with a very strong opening verse from none other than Vince Staples, who, for whatever reason, does a better job of framing the narrative concept of the track than Ab Soul does in the second half, as this California Dream that's being rapped about is more of a nightmare, given all of the experiences that Vince Staples is referencing on the song. So we have this track where Absol is being kind of outshined by a feature to one down the road with Doechii on I, Myself, and Me, where we're just not really getting enough out of the potential collaboration here. Doechii mostly just kind of lends background vocals to the song, and while I know her versatility allows her to contribute to tracks in ways that, you know, aren't just simply rapping a verse. I mean, come on, this woman is a super talented lyricist, her rap, and it's not like she couldn't contribute to what this song here is all about, given that it's a track about Absol dealing with the pressures of fame and fan expectations, given where he is in his career. Hearing that same perspective from an artist who is entering a very intense phase of her career could have been interesting as well, but that potential was not really realized on a track that frankly is more interesting narratively than it is musically, given how odd the groove of the beat here is and just how off-putting Absol's flows are. And sadly, even though this record does not really start off at a super high point creatively, it somehow falls off from here around the midpoint, as D&D is one of the most underwhelming and forgettable songs I think Solo has ever recorded. Then following this, Don Julio...
The thing is, Absol has a couple songs like that. Twacked, bro. Twacked is memorable because it's just like so random. It's like, what the hell is this?
70 proves just how pointless of an exercise trading bars can be when you have little chemistry or aesthetic overlap with the person that you're rapping with. As hearing Absol trade bars with Fresh feels kind of like listening to Immortal Technique trade bars with, I don't know, Tyga. Then GoPro featuring Ty Dolla $ign feels like, an exercise in mixing so many sounds or genres together you don't really know what any of it is. The track kind of feels like several different aesthetic ideas coming together, and then they're all washed out with psychedelic effects without a real strong song or hook to pull it all together. And as a result, what you get...
Yeah, without a strong hook. And that's... Yeah, I think that's perfectly said.
Is kind of like this cold, stale stew of sounds that have been left over in the freezer since like 2013 and then are spiked with LSD. After this, Saudi Sweats feels like I'm plunging even deeper into some kind of tripped out Willy Wonka fantasy with some absolutely awful singing from Absol, topped with these flute arpeggios and idyllic strings. It kind of sounds like one of those blissful, cheeky interludes you might get from a Kendrick album where you are being delivered like some kind of self-aware narrator commentary, something like that. But there's not a story arc on this album to give a track like this any discernible purpose.
Man, that boy is spitting. That boy is spitting. And the thing is, these songs like the song D&D with Notorious N.I.Q. And then you got the 8 Mile intro. And then like, it's like all these different parts don't add up to anything, which is what Fantano said earlier. And that's why I said there's lack of focus. There's lack of cohesion on this album. Lack of focus. That's all I'll say. Let's hear that again, Fantano, because you're cooking right now.
It kind of sounds like one of those blissful, cheeky interludes you might get from a Kendrick album, where you are being delivered like some kind of self-aware narrator commentary, something like that. But there's not a story arc on this album to
At
give a
all.
track like this any discernible purpose. Oddly, though, some of the best moments on this record come toward the end of it, be that on Squeeze First 2 or even Bucko Jr., for example, which I think are two of the most barred up songs on the entire
Hard
record.
up.
Absol doesn't even really take the time to build out choruses for these songs to veer away from the lyricism of the track. He's just rapping and rapping and rapping and rapping without an interruption in sight, which is great. I mean, not super duper catchy tracks, but they at least kind of like stand well on their lyrical merits and they don't
Right.
indulge in any off putting switch ups that ruin the momentum of the song. And there's also Crazier with Jid, which in my opinion is just godly, really the best single from the record, too. Not only are Absol's and Jid's respective performances on this track awesome, but it's a great beat choice as well with the
Yeah, and Absol and Jid, their styles blend well together, I think.
these awesome little wailing tones, some droning bass, as well as primal drums. It feels almost like an Arm& Hammer type beat. We also get Peace featuring Lupe Fiasco, who I mentioned earlier in the review. And for this one, my fingers were crossed for something that was going to be fireworks and focused.
Yeah, if you got Lupe and Absol on the same song, you expect greatness, right? You expect greatness.
But given that it is Absol and Lupe Fiasco, I guess I can't be surprised they decided to go the
Opposite.
low-key, multi-phase, moody sort of conceptual route with it. And for sure, the track comes out interesting and compelling in its own way, with a big final verse being written from the perspective of a close friend of Absol's, Doughburger, who he lost several years ago. This then causes him to reflect on his own self-destructive behavior, his perseverance and will to live. And despite this relative high point on the album, somehow the record really fails to stick the landing in its final moments. The Sky's Limitless is an awkward reworking of the Sky's the Limit single from Biggie's Life After Death record. I mean, it's obviously a classic track, but even with his own lyrical talents and guest vocalists, Absol can't seem to make the song work in his favor. It's an odd instance of imitation, as is the closing track, Righteous Man, where he seems to be rapping out his own variation of Kendrick Lamar's How Much a Dollar Cost with mostly the same instrumental. And he's using this as an opportunity to spit a series of bars that
Interesting perspective on that. I like that.
reflect on his own morality as a person, as an artist, much in the same way Kendrick was on the original track. And this seems to tie back in a way to the opening song on the record. It's like, once again, Absol is using a song or a track or an artist that seemingly is near and dear to him to express like his own personal version of the thing about that track that I guess draws him to it, which is an idea and a concept that I think could have played out well if he had went into
if the whole album like was cohesive enough to where you have that starting point and that ending point and it's tied together by the end of the album, yes, it would make sense. But instead, it just comes off as just random songs. And then you have like loose ideas, but it doesn't tie together. I feel the same way about Kendrick Lamar's recent album, Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. You got like Kodak Black here and there, which seems like Kendrick was going to make some theme around Kodak or what Kodak represents. But then you got the Auntie's Diary song, you got the Mother Eye song, but then you got N95, then you got Worldwide Steppers, and you got Rich Spirit. Like you have this loose ideas, but none of it's tied together. Like it's like, what is the theme of this album? Obviously, we know Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, the theme is therapy and looking into yourself and all that good stuff, but it's not thematic in the same way that all of Kendrick's other albums are. There's like no tight story or tight theme that's wrapping it together. And similar here with Soul Burger.
To it with more creativity, more of an emphasis on novelty. But instead, what he's doing here comes across more like this elaborate rap cosplay, which I don't think he has to do in order to express the feelings that he's looking to express around his own well-being or his sense of human decency. Yeah, it's not necessary. And as an artist who has created some of the great and fantastic tracks that he has, I think he's capable of much more, which is why personally I found this album to be so disappointing. So yeah, I'm kind of feeling a...
So before he gives his number, let me give my number. We got different rating scales, but this is my rating scale right here. 5-star, best in show. That's a classic album, basically. The last rap album to get just a straight 5 out of 5 stars was Bandana by Madlib and Freddie Gibbs. I give it like a 2.5 to 3. It's average to good. At the lowest point, it's average. You might even say unexceptional. A few highlights, but otherwise bland. I give it 2 to 3 stars, so we could land right at 2.5, because I don't think it's bad. But it does little to establish the artist or maintain quality. This is not like one of Absol's best works or anything like that. Which, you know, Absol, he's extremely talented, but I saw people say so many great things about this Soul Burger album. I was just expecting a little bit more. And being the caliber of rapper that Absol is, I was also expecting a little bit more. So let's see what Fantano gives him.
Yeah, light 4 on this one. Transition, have you given this record a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it?
Okay, let's see some of the comments. Just because you don't have abs or soul doesn't make this a 4 out of 10. Okay, he's trolling. You would have given it a 10 if it was called Veggie Burger. California with Vince Staples is an amazing track. Ninth Wonder needs to get his flowers. Ninth Wonder, stay getting his flowers. Shout out to Ninth Wonder, hip hop legend. Yeah, but I think California Dreaming with Vince Staples is the best song on here. You gave no time to how the overarching themes of this album are produced in the intro. Well, I just don't think they're executed effectively throughout the album. You can have themes that you wanted to do in the intro, but if it's not executed in a good way across the album, does it matter that you mentioned them at first if you didn't execute them well later? The amalgamation of Soul and his deceased friends' identities is why Soul to Soul is sampled. Okay, that's fine. And why he shifted his perspective so drastically across the song and the album itself. I feel like that could also be a cop-out. Well, the reason why the album is nothing really makes sense sequentially how things happens is because he wanted it to be that way. If that's what you're doing, make it more apparent or execute it better throughout the album. But saying it this way, like, yo, Soul to Soul is sampled because it's about deceased friends, and that's why the perspective and the topics in the intro are so wildly different, and then that's why none of the other songs sequentially make sense, is because it's on purpose. It's like a cop-out. The melding of his cerebral and his street sides, even at times rapping in ways that don't seem like him at all, to the point where he raps and Doe Burger's voice himself on Peace. That's fine. I mean, I think this is a perfectly good rebuttal. My rebuttal to this would be executed better musically, which again, it's hard to say that when a man is rapping about his deceased friends and he's going through so much himself, to then critique it musically. It's like a fine line to walk. It's because, especially when the music is so personal, to critique an album that's super personal, it just feels different. Like J. Cole, For Your Eyes Only, super personal. And this is the last comment we'll read. I'm realizing that I've mostly been watching Fantano the last 5 years or so, not to inform me on genres I have a lot of knowledge and appreciation of, but to more so open my minds to genres where I don't. I don't have to agree with his takes, but I've found numerous artists today that I love because of the channel. Yeah, shout out to Anthony Fantano. I thought that was a great review. Actually, I agree with a lot of Fantano's takes. Like, there's only a couple of his reviews that I've seen. I also haven't seen all of his reviews, but there's only a couple I've seen where I'm just like, you completely missed the mark. I think he was on mark with this one. So what do y'all think? What do y'all think about this Soul Burger album? You think it's one of his best albums? You think me and Fantano, we just missed the point? It just went over our heads as people who have been listening to Absol for 15 years now, who have listened to thousands of albums. It just went over our heads. Let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Top5rapwebsite.com. Peace.